The gunshot that ended Marshal Tucker's life echoed through the canyon just as Garrett Wade crested the ridge. And he knew without looking that everything he'd been riding toward had changed forever. Garrett pulled his horse to a stop, dust rising around them as the animal sensed his tension. Below, near the edge of a cliff overlooking miles of California desert, stood a woman alone. She wore a simple dress that had once been blue but was now faded by sun and travel, her dark hair loose and moving in the wind. She wasn't running from the sound of the shot. She wasn't even looking back toward the town of Calico that sat 3 miles behind them. She was just standing there, staring out at the horizon as if the violence of this territory in 1882 couldn't touch her. Garrett urged his horse down the slope, approaching slowly. He'd been riding for 6 days straight, tracking a gang that had robbed the bank in Barstow, but something about this woman made him forget about duty for a moment. As he drew closer, he could see her shoulders were straight despite whatever had brought her out here. She didn't turn even when his horse's hooves crunched over the rocky ground behind her. "Madam," Garrett said, removing his hat, "that gunshot came from town. You shouldn't be out here alone." She finally turned to look at him, and Garrett felt something shift in his chest. She was younger than he'd first thought, maybe 23 or 24, with eyes that held both sadness and determination. There were tear tracks on her dusty cheeks, but she wasn't crying now. "I'm not going back," she said simply, her voice steady despite everything. Then she turned back to the horizon. "I'm searching for tomorrow." Garrett dismounted, keeping a respectful distance. "That's a long search, madam. Tomorrow's got a way of staying just out of reach. Then I'll keep walking toward it." She wrapped her arms around herself. "Today took everything from me. Yesterday wasn't much better. Tomorrow's all I have left." He studied her for a moment, noting the absence of a horse, any supplies, or even a canteen. The California desert wasn't forgiving, especially not in late summer. "You planning to walk into tomorrow?" "Because out here you won't make it past tonight without water." She looked at him then, really looked at him, taking in his weathered face, the badge on his vest, the genuine concern in his eyes. "Are you going to take me back to Calico?" "That depends," Garrett said carefully. "Did you have anything to do with that gunshot?" "No." She shook her head. "But the man who fired it did me a favor, even if he doesn't know it. Marshal Tucker was going to force me to marry him. He said my father's debts gave him the right. When I refused this morning, he said he'd come for me tonight, and there wasn't a soul in that town who would stop him. I was going to run, but then I heard the shot, and I thought maybe God had answered a prayer I was too afraid to speak out loud." Garrett's jaw tightened. He'd heard stories about Tucker, none of them good. The man had worn a badge, but he'd used it like a weapon to get what he wanted. If someone had finally called him out, Garrett wasn't inclined to shed tears. But this woman was still in danger, standing out here with nothing. "What's your name?" he asked. Nora Owens." She met his eyes. "And before you ask, I'm 23 years old. I've lived in Calico for 2 years since my father dragged us here chasing silver dreams. And I have exactly nothing to my name except this dress, and the knowledge that I'd rather die free in this desert than live one more day in that town." "Well, Miss Owens, dying in the desert seems like a waste." Garrett gestured to his horse. "I've got water and supplies. Why don't we make camp and you can tell me about this tomorrow you're searching for? Maybe I can help you find it." Nora studied him with those dark, searching eyes. "Why would you help me? You're a lawman. Shouldn't you be investigating that gunshot? I'm a deputy marshal, not the local law, and right now I'm more concerned about making sure you don't become a tragedy in this story." He held out his canteen. "Please, at least drink something." She hesitated, then took the canteen, drinking deeply. When she lowered it, some of the tension had left her shoulders. "Thank you. I didn't think anyone in this territory knew how to be kind anymore. Kindness is scarce, Garrett admitted, but it's not extinct, not yet. He looked back toward Calico, where smoke was starting to rise. Looks like the town's got its hands full anyway. Why don't you tell me about your father's debts while I set up camp? As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, Nora told him everything. Her father, Thomas Owens, had been a dreamer who'd moved them from Missouri 2 years ago, convinced he'd strike it rich in the silver mines around Calico. Instead, he'd found debt, disappointment, and eventually a bottle that he couldn't seem to put down. 6 months ago, he'd borrowed money from Marshal Tucker to pay for mining equipment. When the mine produced nothing, the debt grew. 3 months ago, her father had died in a mining accident, and Tucker had come to collect, deciding that Nora herself was payment enough. He gave me time to grieve, Nora said bitterly as Garrett built a small fire. 2 whole months before he started making his intentions clear. The town knew. Everyone knew. But Tucker was the law in Calico, and who was going to stop him? Who was going to stand up for a dead drunk's daughter? You stood up for yourself, Garrett said, feeding small sticks into the growing flames. That takes courage, or desperation. Nora sat on a rock near the fire, watching him work. Do you know what it's like, deputy, to feel like tomorrow will never come? To wake up each morning knowing that today will be just as bad as yesterday, and the day after will be worse? I do, actually. Garrett sat back on his heels, his green eyes reflecting the firelight. Lost my wife and daughter to cholera 7 years ago. For a long time after that, I wasn't searching for tomorrow. I was hiding from it. Thought if I could just stop time, maybe the pain would stop too. Nora's expression softened. I'm sorry, that's a grief I can't imagine. Every grief is different, Garrett said quietly, but they all hurt the same way. They all make tomorrow seem impossible. He looked up at her. But here's what I learned. Tomorrow comes whether we're ready or not. The question is whether we're going to meet it standing still or moving forward. Is that why you became a lawman? To keep moving forward, partly. Also figured if I couldn't save my own family, maybe I could save someone else's. He pulled out some dried meat and hardtack from his saddlebags. It's not much, but it'll keep you going. Nora accepted the food gratefully. They ate in comfortable silence as the stars began to emerge overhead, brilliant and uncountable in the clear desert sky. The temperature was dropping fast, as it always did in the desert at night, and Garrett offered her his bedroll along with a spare blanket. What about you? Nora asked. I'll keep the fire going. I've slept in worse conditions. He added another piece of wood to the flames. Besides, I want to keep watch. Tucker might be dead, but that doesn't mean there aren't other dangers out here. You don't have to do this, Nora said softly. I'm not your responsibility. Garrett looked at her across the fire, his expression serious. Maybe not. But I'm making you my responsibility anyway. Call it a lawman's duty or call it human decency. Either way, you're not facing tomorrow alone. Something in Nora's chest loosened at those words, a knot she hadn't realized she'd been carrying. She wrapped herself in the blanket, inhaling the scent of leather and sage that clung to it. Tell me about your tomorrow, Deputy Wade. What are you searching for? He was quiet for a long moment, staring into the flames. I guess I'm searching for a reason to believe this territory can be more than just violence and greed. I've seen so much darkness these past few years. Sometimes I wonder if there's any light left worth fighting for. There is, Nora said with surprising conviction. There has to be. Otherwise, what's the point of searching for tomorrow at all? Garrett smiled then, a real smile that transformed his weathered face. You might be right about that, Miss Owens. You just might be right. That night, Nora slept better than she had in months. lulled by the sound of the fire and the quiet presence of a man who'd chosen kindness over duty. And Garrett kept watch, protecting not just her body from the dangers of the desert, but something more precious, the fragile hope that tomorrow might actually be worth finding. When dawn broke over the California desert, painting everything in shades of pink and gold, Garrett was already up making coffee from his supplies. Nora woke to the smell of it, sitting up to find him crouched by the fire, his hat pushed back on his head. "Morning," he said, offering her a tin cup. "It's not fancy, but it's hot. It's perfect." Nora accepted the cup, wrapping her hands around its warmth. The morning air was cold, a sharp contrast to the heat that would come later. "So what happens now?" "Now we figure out what your tomorrow looks like," Garrett said, settling back on his heels. "You can't go back to Calico, that much is clear. But you can't wander the desert without supplies either. I'm heading to San Bernardino to report to my commanding officer. It's a 2-day ride from here. You could come with me, get a fresh start in a bigger town where nobody knows your history." Nora considered this, sipping the strong coffee. "And what would I do in San Bernardino? I have no money, no skills except keeping house and reading books. My father's education was good for that, at least." "Reading books is more of a skill than you might think," Garrett said. "San Bernardino has a school. They're always looking for teachers, especially women who can teach the younger children. It doesn't pay much, but it's honest work and a roof over your head." "You've given this thought," Nora observed, a hint of warmth in her voice. "Spent most of the night thinking about it," Garrett admitted. "Figured you deserved a plan better than just wandering toward the horizon. Most men would have just left me here or dragged me back to town." "I'm not most men," Garrett met her eyes. "And I meant what I said. You're not facing tomorrow alone." Something passed between them in that moment, a connection neither could fully explain. It was too soon to call it anything more than kindness and gratitude, but there was a foundation being laid, brick by careful brick. They broke camp as the sun climbed higher, Garrett making sure Nora had water and a place on his horse. She sat in front of him in the saddle, acutely aware of his solid presence behind her, his arms on either side as he held the reins. It was improper by any standard of society, but out here in the desert, propriety seemed like a luxury neither could afford. "Tell me about your wife," Nora said as they rode. "What was her name?" Garrett was quiet for so long that Nora thought he might not answer. Then softly he said, "Grace. Her name was Grace. She had hair the color of wheat and a laugh that made everyone around her smile. Our daughter, Emma, was only 3 when they died. She had her mother's laugh. They sound beautiful. They were everything." His voice was rough with old grief. "We had a small ranch outside of Dodge City. I was working as a deputy there, trying to build something good for them. Then the sickness came through, and in less than a week, they were both gone. I burned that ranch to the ground and started riding. Haven't stopped since." Nora felt tears prick her eyes. "I'm sorry doesn't seem like enough. It never is, but I appreciate it anyway." He shifted slightly in the saddle. "What about you? Was there ever anyone special in Missouri? Someone you had to leave behind?" "No. My father's drinking started long before we left Missouri. Most respectable men knew to stay away from the drunk's daughter. And the ones who didn't stay away weren't respectable." She stared out at the landscape rolling past them. "I used to dream about love like the kind in books. Men who were honorable and strong, who saw women as partners instead of property. I thought maybe California would be different, but it turned out to be the same story, just a different setting." "California's still young," Garrett said. "It's rough and wild, but that means it can still become anything. The story isn't finished yet." "Is that optimism I hear, Deputy Wade?" "I thought you said you were searching for reasons to believe in the light." Maybe you're one of those reasons, Miss Owens. You stood out on that cliff yesterday, ready to walk into the desert rather than surrender your freedom. That takes a kind of light that can't be extinguished. Nora felt warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the rising sun. You barely know me. I know enough. I know you're brave and stubborn, and you haven't let this territory break your spirit. That's more than I can say for most people who end up out here. They rode in companionable silence for a while, the horse's steady gait eating up the miles. The landscape was harsh but beautiful, all red rocks and distant mountains, scattered Joshua trees reaching toward the sky like prayers. Nora found herself relaxing against Garrett's chest, feeling safer than she had in years. Around midday, they stopped at a small creek to water the horse and rest. Garrett helped Nora down from the saddle, his hands steady at her waist. For a moment, they stood close enough that Nora could see the flecks of gold in his green eyes, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for everything. You don't have to keep thanking me." "Yes, I do. Because nobody else would have done what you're doing." She placed a hand on his chest, feeling his heartbeat beneath her palm. "You're a good man, Garrett Wade. Your wife and daughter would be proud of the man you've become." Garrett covered her hand with his own, his calloused fingers gentle. "I'm just trying to do what's right. That's what makes you good." They stood like that for a long moment, something shifting and settling between them. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was the beginning of something that could become love given time and care. Both of them felt it, and both of them were cautious because of their pasts and the wounds they still carried. Finally, Garrett stepped back, clearing his throat. "We should eat something before we push on. Want to make good distance before we camp for the night." They shared more dried meat and hardtack by the creek, along with some wild berries Garrett found growing nearby. Nora watched him move through the wilderness with easy confidence, a man completely at home in this harsh land. She found herself wondering what it would be like to build a life with someone like him, to face each tomorrow together instead of alone. "What are you thinking?" Garrett asked, catching her staring. "That yesterday I thought tomorrow would never come," Nora said honestly. "And today I'm actually looking forward to seeing what it brings." Garrett's smile was slow and warm. "That's a good start, Miss Owens. That's a very good start." They mounted up again and continued their journey, the afternoon sun beating down on them. Garrett pointed out landmarks and told her stories about the territory, about the good people he'd met in his travels, and the small moments of beauty he'd found in unexpected places. Nora listened, soaking in not just the stories but the sound of his voice, the way he spoke with care and consideration. As evening approached, they made camp in the shelter of some large rocks that would protect them from the wind. This time, Garrett let Nora help set up camp, showing her how to arrange the bedrolls and build a proper fire. They worked side by side, their movements becoming synchronized without conscious effort. "You're a good teacher," Nora said as she arranged the last of the kindling. "You're a good student, quick learner." Garrett struck a match and lit the fire. "If you're going to make it out here, you need to know how to take care of yourself." "I thought I was going to San Bernardino to be a teacher." "You are, but that doesn't mean you won't need to know these things." He settled back, watching the flames catch and grow. "Life out here is unpredictable. The more you know, the better prepared you'll be for whatever tomorrow brings." There was that word again, tomorrow. It had become something of a talisman between them, a shared understanding that they were both moving toward something better, even if they couldn't quite see what it was yet. They ate a better dinner that night. Garrett shot a rabbit earlier in the day, and he cooked it over the fire with wild onions and herbs he'd gathered. Nora was surprised by how good it tasted, how something so simple could feel like a feast. My father used to cook like this, Nora said quietly, before the drinking got bad. He'd take me hunting and fishing back in Missouri, and we'd camp out under the stars. He'd tell me stories about all the adventures we'd have, all the places we'd see. She stared into the fire. I miss that version of him, the man he was before disappointment ate him alive. It's hard, loving someone and watching them destroy themselves, Garrett said. You can't save people who don't want to be saved. Took me a long time to learn that. Is that what happened with your wife and daughter? You couldn't save them. There was nothing I could do. The sickness took them so fast. I kept thinking if I'd just been there more, if I'd noticed the symptoms earlier, if I'd gotten the doctor sooner. But the truth is, sometimes bad things happen and there's nothing we can do to stop them. We can only choose how we go on afterward. Nora moved closer to him, drawn by an impulse she didn't fully understand. And you chose to keep moving forward. Eventually. Took me a few years of moving sideways first. He looked at her, their faces close in the firelight. What about you? How will you choose to go on after everything that's happened? I don't know yet, Nora admitted. But I think maybe I want to choose hope. I want to believe that tomorrow can be better than today. I want to believe that there are still good people in this world, people like you who choose kindness over cruelty. There are, Garrett said softly. You just have to know where to look. I'm looking at one right now. The words hung between them, charged with meaning. Garrett reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. His touch was gentle, reverent, the touch of a man who understood how precious and fragile trust could be. Nora, he said, her name a question and an answer all at once. Yes. Her voice was barely a whisper. I need you to understand something. In 2 days, we'll reach San Bernardino. I'll help you get settled, make sure you have what you need. But then I have to ride out again. My work as a deputy marshal takes me all over this territory. I can't promise to stay. I can't promise tomorrow. I'm not asking you to promise anything, Nora said, even though part of her wished she could. You've already given me more than I had any right to expect. You've given me hope and safety and the belief that tomorrow is worth searching for. That's enough. But even as she said it, she knew it wasn't entirely true. Somewhere in the past day and a half, she'd started wanting more. She'd started imagining what it would be like if Garrett didn't ride out again, if he chose to stay and search for tomorrow alongside her. But she also understood that he was a man still carrying his own grief, still trying to find his own way forward. She couldn't ask him to abandon his journey for hers. You're a remarkable woman, Nora Owens, Garrett said, his hand still cupping her face. Any man would be lucky to have you in his life. But not you. The words came out before she could stop them, revealing more than she'd intended. Garrett's expression turned pained. It's not that simple. I'm not the same man I was before Grace and Emma died. I don't know if I can be what someone needs anymore. Maybe you don't have to be anything except yourself. Nora placed her hand over his, holding it against her cheek. Maybe that's enough. For a moment she thought he might kiss her. She could see the want in his eyes, the war between desire and duty, between moving forward and holding back. But in the end, he gently pulled away, though his eyes never left hers. We should get some sleep, he said, his voice rough. Long day of riding tomorrow. Nora nodded, trying to hide her disappointment. She settled into the bedroll, pulling the blanket up to her chin, while Garrett took his position by the fire. But this time, she noticed, he rolled out his own bedroll nearby instead of staying awake all night. It was a small gesture of trust, an acknowledgement that they were in this together, at least for now. Garrett, she said into the darkness. Yeah, tomorrow will come whether we're ready or not, but I'm glad I won't be facing it alone. She heard him shift in his bedroll. Me too, Nora, me too. The next morning dawned clear and bright. promising another hot day of travel. They fell into an easy rhythm of breaking camp, both more comfortable with each other after the previous night's conversation. Nora noticed the small ways Garrett looked after her, making sure she had enough water, checking that she was comfortable in the saddle, pointing out interesting features of the landscape to distract her from the monotony of riding. By mid-morning they encountered other travelers on the road, a family in a covered wagon heading toward Calico. The man driving the wagon pulled up when he saw Garrett's badge. "Deputy," the man said, touching his hat brim. "You hear about the trouble in Calico yesterday. What kind of trouble?" Garrett asked, though Nora tensed against him. "Marshall got himself shot down in the street. Fella named Dutch Collins called him out, said Tucker had been extorting money from the miners and using his badge to cover it up. Tucker drew first, but Collins was faster. Whole town saw it happen. Collins is the new marshal now, and word is he's cleaning house." Garrett absorbed this information with a neutral expression. "That's so. Tucker have it coming." "Most folks think so," the man said. "He wasn't a good man, badge or no badge. Collins might be an outlaw in some territories, but he's fair. Says he's going to make Calico safe for honest folks again." They exchanged a few more pleasantries before parting ways. Once the wagon was out of earshot, Nora let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. "It's really over," she said. "Tucker's gone and I don't have to look over my shoulder anymore." "Looks that way," Garrett agreed. "You could go back to Calico if you wanted, start fresh with a new marshal in charge." "No," Nora said firmly. "I meant what I said. That town holds nothing but bad memories for me. I want to find my tomorrow somewhere else." "San Bernardino it is, then." Garrett's arm tightened around her waist, just for a moment, a gesture of support and something more. They rode on through country that was gradually becoming less desert and more grassland, passing through small settlements and past ranches where cattle grazed behind fences. The land was opening up, becoming greener and more hospitable. Nora could feel the change in the air, smell water and growing things instead of just dust and sage. "It's beautiful," she said as they crested a hill and saw a valley spread out below them. "I didn't know California could look like this." "The desert's only one part of it," Garrett said. "There's mountains and valleys, forests and coastline. This territory has everything if you know where to look." "Like people," Nora said softly. "California has good people too if you know where to look." "Yeah," Garrett agreed, his voice warm. "It does." They made camp that evening near a stream surrounded by cottonwood trees. After 2 days in the desert, the sound of running water and the shade of the trees felt like luxury. Garrett caught fish for their dinner while Nora gathered wood for the fire, and they cooked the fish wrapped in wild grape leaves that Garrett found growing nearby. "This is the best meal I've had in months," Nora declared, licking her fingers. "Maybe years." "Food always tastes better when you're outdoors," Garrett said, but he was smiling at her obvious enjoyment. "Though I have to say, Grace was the real cook in our family. She could make anything taste good, even hardtack and beans." "Tell me more about her," Nora said gently. "What else do you remember?" Garrett stared into the fire for a long moment. Usually, talking about Grace brought nothing but pain, but somehow with Nora it felt different. It felt like honoring a memory rather than reopening a wound. "She was practical," he said finally. "Kept me grounded when I'd get too caught up in my own head. She grew up on a farm, knew how to work hard and find joy in simple things. She used to sing while she did chores, old songs her mother taught her. Emma would try to sing along, even though she was too young to know all the words." He smiled at the memory. "On Sundays, we'd take Emma down to the creek near our house. Grace would pack a lunch and we'd spend the whole afternoon just being together. Those were the best days." "She sounds wonderful." She was. I was lucky to have her for the time I did." He looked at Nora. "I think she would have liked you. You remind me of her in some ways, that same steel underneath the kindness." "I'll take that as a compliment. It is. The highest one I can give." Garrett added another log to the fire. "What about you? What does your perfect tomorrow look like?" Nora thought about it, staring up at the stars emerging in the darkening sky. "I want a place that's mine. Not my father's, not some man's who thinks he owns me. Mine. I want to wake up each morning and decide for myself what that day will bring. I want to teach children and watch them learn and grow. I want to plant a garden and know I'll be there to see it bloom." She paused. "And I want to love someone who sees me as an equal, as a partner, someone who chooses to be with me rather than someone who needs to own me." That doesn't seem like too much to ask. In this territory, it might as well be asking for the moon. She looked at him across the fire. "But I'm going to keep searching anyway, because the alternative is accepting less than I deserve, and I'm done doing that." "Good," Garrett said with conviction. "Don't ever settle, Nora. Don't ever let this world convince you that you should accept crumbs when you deserve the whole feast." They talked late into the night, sharing stories and dreams, learning each other in ways that had nothing to do with physical touch and everything to do with emotional connection. Nora told him about the books she loved, the education her father had given her before the drink took him, her dreams of maybe writing her own stories someday. Garrett talked about his childhood in Texas, his decision to become a lawman, the places he'd been, and the things he'd seen in his years of riding. When they finally settled into their bedrolls, they were closer together than they'd been the night before, close enough that Nora could hear Garrett's breathing, could feel his presence like a physical warmth even though they weren't touching. "Garrett," she whispered into the darkness. "I'm awake. I'm scared," she admitted. "About tomorrow, about getting to San Bernardino and being alone again." She heard him move, felt rather than saw him shift closer. Then his hand found hers in the darkness, his fingers intertwining with hers. "You won't be alone," he said firmly. "Even if I have to ride out, I'll come back. I'll check on you, make sure you're doing all right, and I'll write when I can. You have my word on that." "Promises about tomorrow," Nora said, her voice thick with emotion. "This is one promise I intend to keep." He squeezed her hand. "You're important to me, Nora. I know we've only known each other a few days, but that doesn't change the truth of it. You've reminded me that there's still good in this world, still things worth protecting. I'm not going to walk away from that. I'm not going to walk away from you." Nora felt tears slide down her temples into her hair. "I was ready to die in that desert. I thought there was nothing left worth living for. And then you showed up, and everything changed. Sometimes that's how it happens. Sometimes tomorrow finds you when you least expect it." They fell asleep like that, hands clasped between their bedrolls, two wounded souls finding comfort in each other's presence. And for the first time since Grace and Emma died, Garrett slept without nightmares. And for the first time since her father's death, Nora slept without fear. Morning brought them closer to San Bernardino and closer to the moment when they'd have to decide what came next. Neither spoke much as they rode, both lost in their own thoughts. The landscape continued to change, becoming more settled, with farms and ranches appearing more frequently along the road. By early afternoon, they could see San Bernardino in the distance, a growing town nestled in a valley with mountains rising behind it. It was bigger than Calico, more established, with real streets and buildings that looked built to last rather than thrown together by desperate prospectors. "It's a real town," Nora said, surprised at how much relief she felt seeing it. "One of the fastest growing in California," Garrett said. "Railroad came through a few years back, brought people and commerce. It's rough around the edges still, but it's got potential." They rode into town mid-afternoon, drawing some curious looks from the people on the streets. A woman riding with a deputy marshal wasn't exactly scandalous, but it was unusual enough to warrant attention. Garrett stopped in front of a neat white building with a sign that read, "Mrs. Catherine Miller's boarding house for respectable women." "Wait here," he said, helping Nora down from the horse. "Let me talk to Mrs. Miller. She's a good woman, takes in ladies who need a safe place to stay. She might know about teaching positions, too." Nora waited on the porch, nervous energy making her fidget with her worn dress. Through the window, she could see Garrett talking to a stout woman with gray hair and a kind face. After several minutes, they both came outside. "Miss Owens," Mrs. Miller said warmly, looking her over with sharp but not unkind eyes. "Deputy Wade tells me you're looking for respectable work and lodging. Is that correct?" "Yes, madam," Nora said, straightening her shoulders. "I can read and write, do figures, and I'm not afraid of hard work. Deputy Wade thought there might be teaching positions available." "There are, as it happens. The school board has been looking for someone to teach the younger children. The pay isn't much, but it includes room and board at the schoolhouse. Of course, you'd have to pass muster with Mrs. Henrietta Stone, the headmistress. She's particular about who she hires." "I'd be grateful for the opportunity to meet with her." Mrs. Miller nodded approvingly. "I like your manners, girl, and if Deputy Wade vouches for you, that's good enough for me. Why don't you come inside, get cleaned up, and I'll send word to Mrs. Stone that we have a candidate for her. You can stay here tonight on the house while we sort things out." "Thank you," Nora said, her voice thick with gratitude. "Thank you so much." "Thank Deputy Wade," Mrs. Miller said, her eyes twinkling. "He's paid for a week's lodging if you need it until you're sorted with the teaching position." Nora turned to Garrett, emotions swirling through her. "You didn't have to do that. I know." His green eyes were soft as they met hers. "But I wanted to. Consider it an investment in tomorrow." Mrs. Miller, sensing they needed a moment, excused herself back inside. Garrett took Nora's hands in his, holding them gently. "I have to report to my commanding officer now," he said quietly. "It might take a few days to sort out my next assignment, but I'll come back before I ride out. I'll make sure you're settled. What if you get sent out right away?" "Then I'll send word, and I'll come back when I can. I told you, Nora, I'm not walking away from you." He lifted one of her hands to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. It was a gesture both old-fashioned and deeply intimate, and it made Nora's breath catch. "You've given me something I thought I'd lost. You've made me want to search for tomorrow again." "You've given me tomorrow," Nora said softly. "You've given me hope and safety and the belief that good men still exist in this world." "I'm not that good," Garrett said with a slight smile. "But I'm trying to be better. That's all any of us can do." They stood there for a long moment, neither wanting to let go, both knowing they had to. Finally, Garrett stepped back, though his eyes held a promise. "I'll see you soon," he said. "I'll be searching for tomorrow," Nora replied, managing a smile despite the tears threatening to fall. "But now I know it's not so far away after all." She watched him mount his horse and ride down the street toward the marshal's office, her heart full of emotions she couldn't quite name. It wasn't goodbye, she told herself. It was just a pause in the story, a moment to catch their breath before the next chapter began. Mrs. Miller appeared at her elbow, handing her a handkerchief. "He's a good man, that one. Seen him come through here a few times over the years. Never seen him look at anyone the way he looked at you just now. We barely know each other," Nora said, dabbing at her eyes. "Sometimes knowing doesn't take long. Sometimes it just takes the right circumstances and the right hearts." Mrs. Miller patted her arm. "Come on inside, dear. Let's get you cleaned up and fed. Mrs. Stone will want to meet you this evening if you're up for it." The next few hours passed in a blur. Mrs. Miller provided Nora with a hot bath, the first she'd had since leaving Calico, and lent her a clean dress that was a bit too big but infinitely better than her travel-stained one. She braided Nora's hair and fed her a proper meal of roast chicken and vegetables, clucking over how thin she was. By the time Mrs. Henrietta Stone arrived that evening, Nora felt almost human again. The headmistress was a tall, severe-looking woman in her 50s, with steel-gray hair pulled back in a tight bun and sharp blue eyes that seemed to see everything. She questioned Nora extensively about her education, her experience with children, and her reasons for seeking a teaching position. "I won't lie to you, Miss Owens," Mrs. Stone said finally. "The work is difficult and the pay is modest. Many of our students come from mining families and farm families. They can be rough and their schooling has been irregular. You'll have children ranging from 5 to 12 years old, all in the same classroom, all at different levels. It's not for the faint of heart." "I understand, madam," Nora said, meeting her eyes steadily. "I'm not afraid of hard work, and I believe every child deserves an education, regardless of their circumstances. Why do you want this position? Be honest." Nora took a breath. "Because I need a fresh start. Because I've seen what happens to women who don't have the means to support themselves, and I never want to be in that position again. But also because I believe in the power of education. My father, for all his faults, taught me to read and think and question. Those gifts changed my life. I want to give that same gift to other children." Mrs. Stone studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I believe you mean that. Very well, Miss Owens. I'm willing to give you a trial period of 3 months. If you prove competent and the children respond well to you, the position will become permanent. You'll start Monday morning. Classes run Monday through Friday, 8 o'clock to 3 o'clock. Room and board are provided in the quarters attached to the schoolhouse, and your salary will be $15 a month. Does this suit you?" "Yes, madam. Thank you, madam." Nora could barely contain her excitement. $15 a month was more money than she'd ever had control of in her life. "Don't thank me yet," Mrs. Stone said dryly. "Wait until you've met your students. Now come along. I'll show you the schoolhouse and your quarters. You might as well move in tonight if Mrs. Miller doesn't mind." "Not at all," Mrs. Miller said warmly. "I'm just happy to see the girl settled." The schoolhouse was a white clapboard building on the edge of town, with a bell tower and large windows that let in plenty of light. Inside was a single large room with desks of varying sizes, a blackboard at the front, and shelves of well-worn books. The teachers' quarters were attached to the back, consisting of a small bedroom, a sitting area, and a tiny kitchen. It was simple but clean, with a window that looked out onto a small garden. "The last teacher planted vegetables," Mrs. Stone said, gesturing to the garden. "You're welcome to maintain it if you like. Fresh food helps stretch your salary." "It's perfect," Nora said, her voice catching. "It's more than I could have hoped for." Mrs. Stone's expression softened slightly. "Mrs. Miller told me a bit of your situation. You've had a hard time of it, but that's no excuse for poor teaching. I expect excellence from my instructors, Miss Owens. Don't disappoint me." "I won't, madam. I promise." After Mrs. Stone left, Mrs. Miller helped Nora settle in, bringing over some basic supplies and an extra quilt for the bed. "I know it's not much," she said, looking around the small quarters, "but it's yours and that's worth something." "It's worth everything," Nora said, running her hand over the back of a worn chair. "It's mine. I've never had anything that was just mine before." "Well, you do now, dear. You found your tomorrow." After Mrs. Miller left, Nora stood in the middle of her new home, slowly turning in a circle. It was tiny, yes, and the furniture was old and mismatched, but it was clean and safe and hers. No one could take it from her. No one could use it to control her. She'd earned it through her own abilities, and that made it more precious than any palace. She walked to the window and looked out at the garden, already planning what she might plant in the spring. Then her eyes lifted to the mountains beyond, painted gold and purple in the setting sun. Somewhere out there, Garrett was probably finishing his report, probably thinking about his next assignment. Was he thinking about her too? Did he feel this same strange mix of excitement and longing that she felt? A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. Her heart leaped, hoping it might be Garrett, but it was a young girl of about 10, holding a basket covered with a cloth. "Miss Owens," the girl said shyly. "I'm Rachel. My ma heard you were the new teacher and she sent over some bread and preserves. Welcome to San Bernardino." "Thank you, Rachel," Nora said warmly, accepting the basket. "That's very kind of your mother." "Will you be my teacher?" Rachel asked hopefully. "I've been trying to learn to read better, but it's hard." "I will indeed be your teacher," Nora confirmed. "And I promise we'll work on your reading together. Do you like stories?" "Oh yes, madam. I love stories." "Then we'll get along just fine. Reading is just another way of finding stories, you see. Once you can read well, you'll have all the stories in the world available to you." Rachel beamed, then ran off to tell her mother about the new teacher. Nora watched her go, feeling warmth spread through her chest. This was her tomorrow. This was what she'd been searching for, standing on that cliff, staring at the horizon. Not just survival, but purpose. Not just safety, but meaning. She spent the evening exploring the schoolhouse, looking through the books and supplies, planning lessons in her mind. It was fully dark by the time she finally retired to her small bedroom, lighting the oil lamp on the bedside table. She changed into a nightgown Mrs. Miller had provided and sat on the edge of the bed, suddenly overwhelmed by everything that had changed in just 3 days. 3 days ago, she'd been ready to die in the desert. Now she had a home, a job, a future. And she had Garrett, or at least the promise of Garrett, the hope that he'd come back as he'd said he would. She was just about to blow out the lamp when she heard another knock at the door. This time when she opened it, Garrett stood there, hat in hand, looking tired but pleased. "I hope it's not too late," he said. "I had to wait until my commanding officer finished reading my reports. Took longer than I expected." "It's not too late," Nora said, her heart racing. "Come in." Garrett stepped inside, looking around at her new home with obvious approval. "Mrs. Miller told me about the teaching position. Congratulations." "I can hardly believe it's real," Nora said, closing the door. "Thank you for making this possible, for bringing me here, for vouching for me. You earned this yourself. I just opened a door, you walked through it." He turned to face her, and the lamplight cast shadows across his face, making him look younger and more vulnerable than she'd seen him before. "My commanding officer is sending me to investigate some rustling complaints near Los Angeles. I'll be gone for at least 2 weeks, maybe longer." Nora's heart sank, even though she'd known this was coming. "When do you leave?" "Dawn tomorrow." He stepped closer to her. "I know it's fast. I know we've barely had time to figure out what this is between us. But Nora, I need you to know something before I go." "What?" she whispered. "When I found you on that cliff, searching for tomorrow, I was just going through the motions of living. I'd been doing my job, catching criminals, serving justice, but I wasn't really alive. I was just existing, getting through each day without thinking too hard about what it all meant." He reached up and cupped her face gently. "You've woken something up in me. You've made me want to search for tomorrow too, not just let it come and go. You've made me want to live again." Tears spilled down Nora's cheeks. "You saved my life, not just from the desert, but from despair. You showed me that good men still exist, that tomorrow is worth reaching for." "We saved each other," Garrett said softly, his thumb wiping away her tears. "And I'm not ready to let that go. I don't know what the future holds, Nora. I don't know how often I'll be able to get back to San Bernardino. But I know I want to try. I want to see where this leads, if you're willing." "I'm willing," Nora said without hesitation. "I'm more than willing." "There's something else I need to tell you," Garrett said, his expression turning serious. "When Grace died, I swore I'd never let myself care about anyone again. It hurt too much to lose her. I thought if I just kept moving, kept focusing on my work, I could avoid that kind of pain forever. And now I realize that avoiding pain means avoiding life. It means never taking a chance on happiness. And you, Nora Owens, you're worth taking a chance on." He leaned his forehead against hers. "I'm scared. I'm terrified, actually, because I'm starting to care about you and I don't know if I can survive losing someone I love again." "You won't lose me," Nora said fiercely. "I'm not going anywhere. I'll be right here, teaching children and tending my garden and waiting for you to come back, however long it takes." Garrett pulled back just enough to look into her eyes. "That's a big promise to make to a man you've only known 3 days. Sometimes knowing doesn't take long," Nora said, echoing Mrs. Miller's words. "Sometimes it just takes the right circumstances and the right hearts. I know enough, Garrett. I know you're kind and brave and honorable. I know you see me as a person, not property. I know that when I'm with you, I feel safe and valued and seen. That's enough to build on." "You're an extraordinary woman," Garrett said, his voice rough with emotion. "And you're an extraordinary man, so let's be extraordinary together. Let's search for tomorrow side by side, even when we're apart." Garrett smiled then, a real smile that lit up his whole face. Then slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he lowered his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, a question being asked and answered. But as Nora's arms came up around his neck and his hands settled at her waist, pulling her closer, the kiss deepened into something more certain, more promising. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard, foreheads pressed together. "I'll come back," Garrett said against her lips. "I swear to you, Nora, I'll come back as soon as I can." "I'll be here," Nora promised, "teaching and living and becoming the person I was always meant to be, and when you come back, I'll tell you all about it." "I'll write," Garrett said. "Every chance I get, and you write to me too. Care of the United States Marshal's office in Los Angeles. They'll forward my letters to wherever I am." "I'll write you novels," Nora said, laughing through her tears. "I'll tell you about every student, every lesson, every vegetable in my garden. I'll read every word." He kissed her again, softer this time, a kiss that felt like a promise. "I should go. I need to be up before dawn. I know." But Nora didn't release him immediately, holding on for one more moment. "Be safe, Garrett Wade. Come back to me." "Always," he promised. He left then, and Nora stood in the doorway, watching him walk back toward town until he disappeared into the darkness. Then she closed the door, leaned against it, and let herself cry. But they weren't tears of sadness, not entirely. They were tears of release, of hope, of the overwhelming feeling that her life had just irrevocably changed for the better. Tomorrow would come, just as it always did. But now she had something to look forward to, someone to share it with. She'd been searching for tomorrow when Garrett found her, and in the process of searching, they'd found each other. The next 2 weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity. Nora threw herself into preparing for her students, organizing the classroom, reviewing the curriculum, and meeting with parents who came to size up the new teacher. Word had spread quickly about her arrival and her connection to Deputy Marshal Wade, and the town was curious about the young woman who'd captured the attention of a man known for his solitude. Mrs. Miller became something of a friend and mentor, helping Nora navigate the social landscape of San Bernardino. "Don't let them intimidate you," she advised. You're educated and capable, and that's more than most people can say. Hold your head high." Nora's first day of teaching arrived with a mix of terror and excitement. 23 children filed into her classroom that Monday morning, ranging from tiny 5-year-olds to several strapping 12-year-olds who looked at her skeptically, clearly wondering if this young woman could really control them. "Good morning," Nora said, standing at the front of the classroom with her hands clasped to keep them from shaking. "My name is Miss Owens, and I'm honored to be your teacher. This year, we're going to learn together. Not just reading and writing and arithmetic, though we'll do plenty of that. We're also going to learn to think, to question, to understand the world around us. We're going to prepare you for all the tomorrows that lie ahead." Little Rachel, sitting in the front row, raised her hand. "Like searching for tomorrow," Nora smiled. "Exactly like that. Every day is a chance to discover something new, to become someone better. And that's what this classroom is for, to help you search for and find all the tomorrows you deserve." The older boys in the back row looked skeptical, but Nora didn't let it daunt her. She launched into her first lesson with confidence she didn't entirely feel, and by the end of that first day, she'd earned at least a tentative respect from most of her students. The work was exhausting but exhilarating, and Nora fell into bed each night satisfied in a way she'd never been before. On the third day, a letter arrived from Garrett. Nora recognized his handwriting on the envelope and her heart leaped. She waited until she was alone in her quarters that evening before opening it, savoring the anticipation. "Dear Nora," it read, "I hope this letter finds you well, and that your teaching is going as well as I'm sure it is. The children of San Bernardino are lucky to have you. The rustling case is more complicated than expected, but I'm making progress. The work keeps me busy, but my thoughts keep wandering back to you. I find myself wondering what you're doing, what you're teaching, whether you've planted anything in that garden yet. I've ridden through some beautiful country these past days, and I keep wishing I could show it to you. There's a valley full of wildflowers that would take your breath away. Maybe someday I can bring you here, and we can search for tomorrow together in all the places this territory has to offer. I'll write again soon. Until then, know that you're in my thoughts. Yours, Garrett." Nora pressed the letter to her chest, reading it 3 more times before finally setting it aside to write her reply. She told him about her students, about young Rachel who was already improving in her reading, about the troublemaker named Jacob who tried to put a frog in her desk, but had been caught by another student. She told him about planting lettuce and radishes in the garden, about Mrs. Miller's kindness, about the mountains she could see from her window and how she thought of him every time she looked at them. "I'm building a life here," she wrote, "but there's a space in it that only you can fill. Come back when you can. I'll be here, teaching and living and becoming, but always watching the horizon for your return, searching for tomorrow but hoping for today. Yours, Nora." The letters became a lifeline for both of them over the following months. Garrett's work took him all over Southern California, investigating crimes and serving warrants, but he wrote to Nora whenever he could. His letters were full of descriptions of the places he traveled, the people he met, and increasingly, his growing feelings for her. Nora's letters in return were full of life and warmth, stories about her students and the town, and her own deepening feelings for the man who'd saved her, and then set her free to become herself. 6 weeks after leaving San Bernardino, Garrett finally returned. Nora was in the middle of a geography lesson when she heard a horse outside, and something made her look up. Through the window, she saw him dismounting, and her heart nearly stopped. "Class dismissed early today," she announced to the delight of her students. "We'll continue tomorrow." The children streamed out, several of them noticing the deputy marshal and whispering excitedly. Nora stood at the front of the empty classroom, hands twisting in her skirt, as Garrett appeared in the doorway. He looked tired, dustier than she remembered, but his smile when he saw her was like sunshine breaking through clouds. "Hello, teacher." "Hello, lawman," Nora replied, her voice shaking slightly. They stood there for a moment, just looking at each other, both suddenly shy after weeks of pouring their hearts out on paper. Then Garrett dropped his saddlebags by the door and crossed the room in 3 long strides, pulling Nora into his arms. "I missed you," he said into her hair. "God, I missed you." "I missed you too," Nora said, holding him tight. "Your letters were wonderful, but they're no substitute for you being here." Garrett pulled back just enough to look at her face, his hands framing her face gently. "You look good, happy. Teaching suits you." "It does." "I love it," she smiled up at him. "But I love this more, having you here, having you back." "I'm not staying long," Garrett said, his expression turning regretful. "Just a few days. I have to be in San Diego by the end of the week. Then we'll make the most of the days we have." Nora took his hand. "Come on, I want to show you my garden, and I want to hear everything about your travels, not just what you put in the letters." They spent the evening talking, first in her garden where lettuce and radishes were indeed growing, then over dinner at the boarding house where Mrs. Miller fussed over Garrett and insisted he looked too thin. Later, they walked through the town as the sun set, Garrett's arm around Nora's shoulders, both of them savoring the simple pleasure of being together. "I've been thinking," Garrett said as they stood watching the last light fade from the sky, "about tomorrow and the day after that and all the days that come next." "What about them?" Nora asked, her heart beginning to race. "I've been trying to figure out how to make this work. How to be a deputy marshal who's always riding from one place to another and also be the man you deserve. Someone who's present, who's here, who can build a life with you instead of just passing through it." Nora turned to face him fully. "What are you saying, Garrett?" "I'm saying that I'm tired of searching for tomorrow. I'm ready to start living it." He took both her hands in his. "I've talked to my commanding officer. There's a position opening up in San Bernardino, a proper marshal position, not a deputy who rides circuit. It would mean staying in one place, being part of a community instead of just passing through. The pay's not as good, but it would be enough. You'd stay here, in San Bernardino, if you wanted me to, if you thought that maybe someday you could see a future with me." "Not right away," he added quickly. "I know we need more time, but eventually, if things keep going the way they have been, I'd like to think that we could build that tomorrow together. Actually build it instead of just searching for it." Tears were streaming down Nora's face, but she was smiling. "I'd like that. I'd like that more than anything." "There's one more thing," Garrett said, his expression turning nervous. "I know it's too soon for this. I know by all rights I should wait another year at least. But Nora, I've already lost too much time to fear and grief. I don't want to waste another moment. So I'm going to ask you something, and you can say no, you can tell me to wait, but I need you to know what's in my heart." He released her hands and reached into his pocket, pulling out a small box. Nora's breath caught as he opened it to reveal a simple gold band with a small diamond. "This was Grace's ring," Garrett said quietly. "I've been carrying it with me for 7 years, unable to let it go but unable to look at it either. But last week I took it out and I looked at it, really looked at it, and I realized that Grace would want it to mean something again. She'd want it to be part of a future instead of just a memory of the past." He looked up at Nora, his eyes bright with emotion. "I love you, Nora Owens. I think I started loving you the moment I saw you standing on that cliff, refusing to give up, searching for tomorrow even when you had every reason to give up. You've given me my life back. You've given me a reason to believe in tomorrow again. So I'm asking, even though it's fast, even though we should probably wait, Will you marry me? Will you let me spend all my tomorrows searching for new ones with you?" Nora was crying in earnest now, nodding even before she could get words out. "Yes. Yes, of course, yes. I love you too, Garrett. I love you so much." Garrett's hand shook slightly as he slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been meant for her all along. Then he stood and pulled her into his arms, kissing her deeply. And Nora felt like she was floating, like she'd finally found what she'd been searching for that day on the cliff. When they finally pulled apart, both laughing and crying, Garrett rested his forehead against hers. "I can't take the marshal position until January," he said. "That's 3 months away. And I don't think we should marry until I can be here permanently, can provide properly for you." "That seems reasonable," Nora said, though part of her wanted to argue, wanted to marry him tomorrow and worry about the details later. "But 3 months is going to feel like forever." "We'll write every day," Garrett promised, "and I'll visit whenever I can. And in January, I'll come back for good. We'll get married, and I'll move into the teacher's quarters with you until we can build our own house." "Our own house," Nora repeated, loving the sound of it, "with a big garden and room for children someday." "However many you want," Garrett said, kissing her forehead. "We'll fill that house with love and laughter and all the tomorrows we can find." The next 3 days passed in a blur of happiness. Garrett met all of Nora's students who were fascinated by the deputy marshal and his stories. He helped her repair a broken window in the schoolhouse and build better shelves for the books. They took long walks in the evenings, making plans for their future, dreaming out loud about the life they'd build together. On the morning he had to leave for San Diego, they stood together outside the schoolhouse, holding each other tight. "January," Garrett said firmly. "I'll be back in January and I'll never leave again." "I'll be here," Nora promised. "Teaching and living and counting down the days until you come home." "This is home now," Garrett said, looking around at the town, at the schoolhouse, at Nora's face. "Not some place I'm riding through. Home, because you're here." He kissed her one last time, a kiss full of promise and love and hope for all the tomorrows they'd share. Then he mounted his horse and rode away, turning back twice to look at her before he disappeared around the bend in the road. Nora stood there for a long time, touching the ring on her finger, feeling the weight of it and everything it represented. Then she turned back to the schoolhouse, where her students would be arriving soon, and smiled. She had work to do, a life to live, and a future to prepare for. Tomorrow was no longer something distant and unreachable. It was right here, as close as the ring on her finger, and as certain as the sun rising each morning. The 3 months until January passed both agonizingly slowly and surprisingly fast. Nora threw herself into teaching with renewed energy, her happiness spilling over into everything she did. Her students thrived under her care, and parents began to comment on how their children had changed, how they were more excited about learning, more confident in themselves. Mrs. Miller helped Nora prepare for the wedding, which would be small and simple but perfect. "You're like a daughter to me," the older woman said one afternoon as they worked on Nora's wedding dress, a simple but elegant gown of ivory silk that Mrs. Miller had saved from her own youth. "I'm so happy you found your tomorrow." "I found more than tomorrow," Nora said, smiling at her reflection in the mirror. "I found today too. I'm not just waiting for Garrett to come back. I'm living right now, building a life I'm proud of." "That's the secret," Mrs. Miller said wisely. "Love should add to your life, not become your whole life. You and Garrett understand that. You're both complete people on your own, which means together you'll be extraordinary." Garrett's letters continued to arrive regularly, full of love and anticipation. He told her about finishing his last assignments as a deputy marshal, about saying goodbye to the traveling life he'd led for so long. "I'm ready," he wrote in early December. "Ready to stop running, ready to build something permanent, ready to come home to you." Christmas came, and Nora spent it with Mrs. Miller and some of the other boarding house residents, feeling grateful for the community she'd found in San Bernardino. She taught her students Christmas carols, and they performed for their parents in the schoolhouse. And afterward, everyone agreed it was the best Christmas pageant the town had ever seen. On New Year's Day, 1883, Nora woke with a sense of excitement and anticipation. Garrett would be arriving any day now. His last letter had said he'd be in San Bernardino by the first week of January, ready to take up his position as marshal and ready to marry her. She was in the schoolhouse on January 3rd, preparing lessons for the following week, when she heard a horse outside. Her heart knew before her mind did, and she ran to the door to find Garrett dismounting, a huge smile on his face. "I'm home," he said simply. Nora flew down the steps and into his arms, laughing and crying at the same time. "You're home. You're really home. For good," Garrett confirmed, holding her tight. "I'm never leaving again. This is where I belong, with you." They were married a week later in a small ceremony at the town church, with Mrs. Miller standing as Nora's witness and the new deputy marshal standing as Garrett's. All of Nora's students attended, along with what felt like half the town. Nora wore the ivory silk dress and carried wildflowers that Garrett had ridden out at dawn to collect for her. "I, Garrett Wade, take you, Nora Owens, to be my wife," Garrett said, his voice strong and sure as he looked into her eyes. "I promise to love you and cherish you, to search for tomorrow with you every single day, and to never take for granted the gift of your presence in my life. In joy and sorrow, in plenty and want, I will be yours from this day forward, for all the days were given." Nora's voice shook with emotion as she made her own vows. "I, Nora Owens, take you, Garrett Wade, to be my husband. I promise to love you and support you, to build our tomorrows together, and to never forget that it was you who showed me that tomorrow was worth searching for. I will be your partner, your friend, your love from this day forward for all our days." When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Garrett kissed her tenderly, and the church erupted in applause. As they walked back down the aisle together, hand in hand, Nora thought about that day 7 months ago when she'd stood on a cliff, ready to walk into the desert, searching for tomorrow. She'd found so much more than tomorrow. She'd found today and yesterday and every day in between. She'd found love and purpose and home. The reception was held at Mrs. Miller's boarding house, with food provided by the grateful parents of Nora's students. There was music and dancing, and Garrett held Nora in his arms as they swayed to an old waltz, both of them unable to stop smiling. "Happy?" Garrett asked, his lips close to her ear. "More than I ever thought possible," Nora replied. "Thank you for finding me. Thank you for not giving up on tomorrow." "Thank you for reminding me that tomorrow was worth finding," Garrett said. "I love you, Mrs. Wade. I love you too, Marshal Wade." That night, in the small quarters attached to the schoolhouse that were now their home, Garrett and Nora began their married life together. It was tender and sweet and full of love, two wounded souls who'd found healing in each other's arms. They talked late into the night, making plans and dreams, promising to face every tomorrow side by side. The next year brought changes and growth for both of them. Garrett took to his work as marshal with the same dedication he'd brought to being a deputy, but now he came home every night to Nora. He became a respected figure in San Bernardino, known for his fairness and his commitment to justice tempered with mercy. Nora continued teaching, beloved by her students and their families. Under her guidance, the school flourished, and Mrs. Stone had to admit that hiring Miss Owens, now Mrs. Wade, had been one of her better decisions. In the spring, they began building their own house on a piece of land just outside town, a two-story home with a big front porch and windows that looked out toward the mountains. Garrett did much of the work himself, with help from men in the community who'd come to respect him. Nora planned every detail, from the kitchen where she'd cook their meals to the extra bedrooms that she hoped would someday be filled with children. They moved into the house in July, exactly 1 year after Garrett had first found Nora on that cliff. That night, standing on their front porch, looking out at their land and the mountains beyond, Garrett pulled Nora into his arms. "We did it," he said softly. "We found tomorrow." "We built it," Nora corrected. "Together, just like we promised." In August, Nora discovered she was pregnant. She told Garrett over dinner one evening, her face glowing with happiness and a touch of nervousness. Garrett's response was to pick her up and spin her around, laughing with pure joy. "A baby," he said, his hands gentle on her still flat stomach. "Our baby, a new tomorrow to welcome into the world. Are you scared?" Nora asked, knowing he must be thinking of Emma, of the daughter he'd lost. "Terrified," Garrett admitted, "but also excited and grateful. This baby won't replace Emma. Nothing could. But it will be a new beginning, a new chance at fatherhood. And this time, I won't take a single moment for granted." Nora continued teaching through the fall, finally stepping down in November when the pregnancy became too advanced for her to comfortably stand in front of a classroom all day. Mrs. Stone hired a temporary replacement with Nora's input, and Nora promised to return to teaching once the baby was old enough. On a cold February morning in 1884, Nora went into labor. Mrs. Miller was there along with the doctor, and Garrett paced the living room, torn between wanting to be with his wife and knowing the birthing room was women's domain. Finally, Mrs. Miller took pity on him and let him in, and Garrett held Nora's hand through the rest of her labor, whispering encouragement and love. When their son was born, healthy and howling, Garrett cried as he cut the cord and took the baby in his arms. "He's perfect," he said, his voice breaking. "Nora, he's perfect. What should we name him?" Nora asked, exhausted but happy, watching her husband cradle their son with such tenderness. Garrett looked down at the baby, then at Nora, his eyes shining. "I was thinking Thomas, after your father. The man he was before the disappointment took him. Your father loved you, Nora, even if he lost his way, and I want our son to carry that love forward." Nora's eyes filled with tears. "Thomas Wade, I love it, but what about a middle name?" "Grant," Garrett said, "for Grace." "So he carries a piece of her too, a reminder that love doesn't end, it just transforms into something new." "Thomas Grant Wade," Nora said, testing it out. "Welcome to the world, Tommy. Welcome to all the tomorrows ahead of you." The years that followed were full and rich. Garrett excelled as marshal, keeping San Bernardino safe and earning the respect of everyone in town. Nora eventually returned to teaching part-time, bringing Tommy with her until he was old enough for school himself. Their garden flourished, their house filled with love and laughter. When Tommy was 3, Nora gave birth to a daughter they named Grace Emma, honoring both of the women who'd come before. 2 years after that, another son arrived, whom they named William after Garrett's father. Each child was loved fiercely, raised with the understanding that tomorrow was always worth searching for, always worth building toward. Garrett never forgot those dark years after he'd lost his first family, and he never took his second chance for granted. Every night, he thanked God for the woman who'd been standing on a cliff searching for tomorrow, and for the chance to search alongside her. Nora never forgot what it felt like to be powerless and afraid, and she used that memory to fuel her teaching and her advocacy for other women who found themselves in difficult situations. She and Mrs. Miller established a fund to help women in need, providing them with resources and opportunities to build their own tomorrows. Years passed. Tommy grew into a serious young man who wanted to follow in his father's footsteps and become a lawman. Grace Emma inherited her mother's love of teaching and books. William was the artist of the family, always drawing and painting the beautiful California landscape around them. On their 20th anniversary, Garrett and Nora stood on the porch of their house, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple. Their children were inside, the older ones helping prepare dinner while young William played with blocks on the floor. 20 years, Nora said, leaning against Garrett's chest. 20 years since you found me on that cliff. Best day of my life, Garrett said, his arms around her waist. Well, tied with our wedding day and the births of each of our children, but still the best. Do you ever think about that day? About what might have happened if you'd ridden past, if you'd been heading a different direction? All the time, Garrett admitted. And every time I think about it, I'm grateful for whatever twist of fate put me on that ridge at that exact moment. I was given a second chance at happiness, and I've tried to earn it every single day since. You have, Nora said firmly. You've been everything I hoped for and more. You've been my partner, my love, my fellow searcher of tomorrows. We've built a good life, Garrett said, looking at their house, their land, thinking of their children and the community they were part of. Better than I ever imagined possible. And we're not done yet, Nora said, turning in his arms to face him. We have so many more tomorrows ahead of us. Grandchildren, maybe, growing old together, watching our children build their own tomorrows. I can't wait, Garrett said, kissing her softly. Every tomorrow with you is a gift. That night, after the children were in bed, Garrett and Nora sat by the fireplace in their living room, holding hands and talking quietly about their plans and dreams. They'd long since stopped searching for tomorrow in the desperate way they had when they first met. Now tomorrow came naturally, each day flowing into the next, full of love and purpose and the deep satisfaction of a life well lived. I'm glad I didn't walk into that desert, Nora said quietly. So am I, Garrett replied, squeezing her hand. So am I. Years continued to pass, each one bringing new joys and challenges. Tommy did indeed become a lawman, eventually taking over as marshal of San Bernardino when Garrett retired at age 55. Grace Emma became a teacher like her mother, taking over Nora's position at the school. William moved to San Francisco to pursue art, but he visited often, filling the house with his latest paintings. Garrett and Nora became grandparents, doting on Tommy's 4 children and Grace Emma's 3. They watched San Bernardino grow from a rough frontier town into a proper city, complete with a railroad station, a hospital, and multiple schools. The California they'd known in 1882 transformed around them, becoming more settled, more civilized, but never losing the spirit of possibility that had drawn so many people west. On their 40th anniversary, now in their 60s, Garrett and Nora took a trip back to Calico, or what was left of it. The silver boom had gone bust years ago, and the town was mostly abandoned now, slowly being reclaimed by the desert. They stood near the ridge where Garrett had first found Nora, looking out at the same horizon she'd been staring at all those years ago. I was so lost, Nora said softly. So hopeless, I thought tomorrow would never come. But it did, Garrett said, his hair now silver but his eyes still as green and warm as ever. It came and it brought everything we needed. It brought us to each other. I'm glad I was searching for tomorrow that day, Nora said. And I'm glad you helped me find it. We found it together, Garrett corrected, pulling her close. Everything we've built, everything we've become, we did it together. That's the secret, Nora. Tomorrow is always better when you don't face it alone. They stood there for a long time, two people who'd found each other in the wilderness and built a life that exceeded both their dreams. The desert wind blew around them, warm and constant, and the horizon stretched out endlessly, full of promise and possibility. Finally, they turned away from the past and walked back to their wagon, ready to return to San Bernardino, to their children and grandchildren, to the life they'd built together. Tomorrow had come again and again and again, and each one had been worth the search. As they drove away, Nora looked back one last time at that ridge, at the place where her life had changed forever. She'd been searching for tomorrow that day, standing alone and desperate, ready to walk into the desert rather than accept the life that had been forced upon her. And tomorrow had come, in the form of a lonely cowboy who'd learned to hope again. They lived many more years together, long enough to see great-grandchildren born, long enough to celebrate 50 years of marriage surrounded by the huge, loving family they'd created. When Garrett finally passed away at age 78, peacefully in his sleep, Nora held his hand and whispered, "Thank you for every tomorrow. Thank you for choosing to search with me." Nora lived another 5 years, spending her time with her family, tending her garden and writing down the story of how she and Garrett had found each other. She wanted her grandchildren and great-grandchildren to know that no matter how dark things seemed, tomorrow was always worth searching for. She wanted them to know that love could heal old wounds and create new beginnings. She wanted them to understand that the best tomorrows were the ones you built yourself, with someone you loved standing beside you. When Nora passed away quietly in her chair on the front porch, looking out at the mountains she'd loved for so many years, her family found her manuscript, titled simply "Searching for Tomorrow." They published it locally, and it became a treasured family heirloom, passed down through generations, a reminder of where they'd come from and the love that had started it all. The house Garrett and Nora built stood for another 100 years, eventually being preserved as a historic site. Tourists would come to see where the famous marshal and his beloved wife had lived, to walk through the rooms where they'd raised their children, to stand on the porch where they'd watched countless sunsets together. But more than the house, more than the artifacts and photographs, what endured was the story itself. The story of a woman standing on a cliff, searching for tomorrow, and the man who'd stopped to help her find it. The story of two wounded souls who'd found healing in each other's arms. The story of love that had transformed both their lives and created a legacy that lasted long after they were gone. Because in the end, that's what mattered. Not the searching, but the finding. Not the loneliness of yesterday, but the love of today and the hope of tomorrow. Garrett and Nora had found what they were looking for, and in doing so, they'd built something beautiful that would outlast them both. Their story became legend in San Bernardino, told and retold, adapted and embellished, but always coming back to the essential truth. That tomorrow is always worth searching for, and it's even better when you find someone to search with you. That love can redeem the past and illuminate the future. That two people, meeting by chance in the wilderness, can change each other's lives forever. And somewhere, in whatever comes after, Garrett and Nora were together still, hand in hand, searching for new tomorrows in whatever realm they now inhabited. Because some loves don't end with death. Some loves are strong enough to cross any horizon, to overcome any obstacle, to last through all the tomorrows that ever were or ever will be. Their great-great-grandson, a history professor, would eventually write a more comprehensive biography, placing their story in the context of the Old West and the settlement of California. But even he admitted in his introduction that the bare facts didn't capture the magic of what Garrett and Nora had found together. History is full of stories, he wrote, but some stories transcend history. Some stories become mythology, teaching us eternal truths about the human experience. The story of Garrett Wade and Nora Owens is one such story. It teaches us that it's never too late for a new beginning, that love can find you in the most unexpected places, that tomorrow is always worth searching for, no matter how dark today might be. And most importantly, it teaches us that the best journeys are the ones we don't take alone. In the end, that was the gift Garrett and Nora gave each other and left to the world. The knowledge that tomorrow comes whether we're ready or not, but we get to choose whether we face it with fear or hope, with despair or love, alone or together. They chose hope. They chose love. They chose each other. And in doing so, they found not just tomorrow, but every tomorrow after that, stretching out before them like the California horizon, endless and full of promise. The story that began with a cowboy finding a woman staring at the horizon, a woman searching for tomorrow, became the story of two lifetimes beautifully lived, of a family lovingly raised, of a legacy that would endure. It became proof that sometimes the search itself leads us exactly where we need to be, to exactly who we need to find. And if you were to visit that old house now, standing on that porch, looking out at those same mountains that Garrett and Nora loved, you might feel it still. The echo of their love, the whisper of their promise to each other, the eternal truth that tomorrow is always worth searching for, always worth finding, always worth building together with someone you love. That's how love stories are supposed to end. Not with an ending at all, but with a beginning that never stops beginning, a tomorrow that keeps coming, a hope that never dies. Garrett found Nora searching for tomorrow, and together they found all the tomorrows they could ever need, and then some. And that, in the end, is everything.